We are live, folks. Jack Smith testifies. Jack Smith testifies. Remember Jack Smith? Well, he's testifying before Congress about the that was the special prosecutor that prosecuted Trump. He has to explain himself in front of Congress today. So this is going to be interesting. I want to see what he has to say. I'm going to turn the volume up. Jack Smith has arrived.
What's your full-time theme?
Dallas.
There he goes. Thank you, sir. Kidding me. It's coming over here. Yeah. You gotta be kidding me.
All right. Did you see Jack Smith? He came through. Oh, he's coming through. He's coming through. He's coming back through.
I thought he answered your question, but he said it with an officer.
No. How good was that audio here? The audio. I'm sure you hear for Dallas. Could you hear my questions when I was talking?
Yeah. The shotgun mic, yeah.
Chad, I have a print on your and this one, so I'll look at it. Which print is this? This is 257.
So the feed's a little fuzzy. I'm going to get another one up. So Jack Smith is going to testify. As some of you might or might not know, he was the special prosecutor that handled the Trump prosecutions, and he's going to get grilled and explain himself to Congress this morning. I thought that would be interesting to cover and see. We're also monitoring what's going on in Minnesota too. And then J.D. Vance and the vice president will be in Minnesota. So we'll cover that later. So he's going to testify here in front of the oversight, House oversight. So Jack Smith testifies today. He's there. We just saw him. He arrived. Reporters, let me kind of give you the scoop of what's being said here. He will publicly testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee today. Jack Smith, the former special prosecutor who led 2 failed prosecutions against President Donald Trump is scheduled to publicly testify before the House Judiciary Committee. The hearing will examine the operations of Smith's office and his team's investigations and prosecutions of Trump and his co-defendants. A lot of scrutiny over his probes. Smith investigated Trump for his role in the efforts of the 2020 elections. Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan last October accused Smith of running a partisan and politically motivated probe of Trump and conducting abusive surveillance. So we're going to put up the AP and we're going to see what's going on. We got these different feeds here. So I'm going to put up a different feed here and see what we got. So Jack Smith. Put up the AP here. Well, at least listen to his open remarks. I don't know how long he'll be testifying for, but we'll at least listen to his opening remarks here, or what he has to say, or opening remarks by Judiciary Chairman. Will Jack Smith tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? We shall see. I find this interesting. Also monitoring what's going on in Minnesota. We can obviously switch to that if something breaks off, because I think of Minnesota today and tomorrow, there's going to be a lot going on. I'll go DWS News because they got a feed out in the hallway till this pops up. We'll put this on. Jack Smith testifies today. House Oversight Committee. Today.
I don't know.
All right, so let me just kind of give you a summary. Who is Jack Smith? Jack Smith, a longtime public corruption prosecutor, was appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland in November 2022 to oversee the investigations into Donald Trump. Smith investigated Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election and his handling of classified documents. He brought criminal charges against Trump in 2023. Trump, no longer president at the time, pleaded not guilty in both cases, and neither went to trial. The case over mishandling classified documents ended with District Judge Cannon from Florida, a Trump appointee, declaring that Smith's appointment was unlawful. The election interference case was hamstrung by the landmark Supreme Court decision and dropped after Trump was reelected. So Smith here is going to have to explain himself to Congress about, bringing up charges on Donald Trump. It'd be interesting. It would be interesting. I mean, there's going to be some fireworks here for sure. It's going to be some fireworks here.
Convention's inauguration, and then me up here. You rarely, if never, see me. You may hear me talking so much. But then, Doug.
Who's making
No. It's almost all verite. All verite with a lot of interviews with Ken and one of his former students is an Iraqi refugee who becomes a photographer and becomes a U.S. citizen between the two conventions. So they're like this nice little. He's handing the baton and preparing him for this as he's watching all these Palestinian protesters and his presence. I was on my diaries in Afghanistan. That was kind of an accident. I never made it. I was just shooting video to sell to the pool, and then I accumulated so much footage. I think I took a course on how to use. Paint like it's such a nightmare, but it worked out. And then I made a full U-turn of the commission, and then just, I was wondering like this, like what you do, but like what's yours? I just think it's such a and then it's just yeah, and I kept meaning to see something. I've been doing the video value for next year, covered the pandemic Oh yeah. But there's enough there to eat some. That's like seasoning. Yeah. It's like at the bottom it's always tubers, right? And it's this thing. And dude, you just find a human back oh yeah. Yeah. They got the one and throw them out after fascinating. I just thought it's a documentary. I'm almost finished. Yeah, I've just handed it off to the editor. It's real. Oh yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. You have to buy me breakfast afterward. Oh yeah. You've already got like 5 or 6 inches of height on it. So.
For people that are not aware, the person there with the T-shirt and the tats up, that was a former Capitol police officer, right? You see a lot. You see him a lot over the years, talking about the situation of January 6th. So it appears he has a front row seat here. Jack Smith, former special counsel who prosecuted Trump on 2 cases, is set to testify and explain himself in front of Congress today. And we'll see. He's saying, Jack Smith is going to claim that his prosecutions of Trump were not partisan.
Swearing in, and then his testimony. It's gonna run one round of questions, but it's gonna go all day. Yeah.
5 or 7 minutes.
I think between 5 and 7 minutes.
Between what? 5 and 7 p.m.
minutes. Or, yeah. I think
5 or 7 p.m. minutes. I said
5 minutes.
okay. I said 5 p.m.
It's good like 2, 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Long day. So.
You got Paris Hilton.
Paris Hilton here again?
Yeah. AOC at 2:30 Triangle.
This one is I shot out of Verite, photographers during the whole election with this 4K and stabilizer and put it on cinematic. So it's
all right. So I also want to share some other news that's breaking in Minnesota. And we'll probably go to Minnesota soon. But Pam Bondi announced that she made an arrest in reference to one individual that has stormed the church in Minneapolis. This is a key, story we've been watching. It seems like Nekima Levy Armstrong, who I guess is an activist and lawyer, they arrested her. So there has been one arrest so far, and more appear to be coming here. Everyone wants to know what's going to happen to the bearded guy, or Don Lemon. We'll continue to monitor that. But the announcement this morning that there has been an arrest. So I'm assuming if she was with a group of people, more people are going to get arrested here. So just wanted to share that. We'll touch on that in a bit. If this is kind of boring, we'll go away. Oh, there's the other officer there too. These 2 individuals are 2 officers that have taken the forefront of speaking out against January 6th. Pam Bondi just announced another arrest for a church stormer. So that's 2. She said more are coming. She just said a second arrest has been made at my direction. Chantil Louisa Allen has been taken into custody. More to come. More to come. And she's so far we have arrested Nekima Levy Armstrong and Chantil Louisa Allen. 2 people. 2 people have been arrested now this morning. Oh my goodness. Don Lemon could be arrested very, very soon. We're on Don Lemon arrest watch. Don Lemon. And that William Kelly guy with the beard, the one that they now are saying is part of stolen valor because he's lied about his military. He was never a combat vet. That guy's, they're going to arrest that guy. So 2 people now have been arrested for the church storming in Minneapolis. This comes when J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, will be in Minneapolis today. And Greg Bovino is actually giving a press conference soon on ICE operations. So we might have to cut into that, but we're going to listen here. I want to hear Jack Smith, at least the opening statements of Jack Smith, and we can always change. If there's some fireworks here or whatever like that, we can switch off. But this is going on. So a lot going on today. We've got Jack Smith testifying in Congress and a lot of stuff going on in Minneapolis. So I just wanted to share that information because I've been waiting to see if anyone gets arrested for the church stuff in Minneapolis. Wow. They're really arresting people. They're really arresting people in Minneapolis now.
Simon Owens.
Yeah, I would think for this one. Yes, he is here. But don't listen to me. I don't know.
I can't read everything. He's like prolific to put so much out.
Well, I'm in a fantasy league culture magazine. So that F1 nomination will give a lot of points.
But they get added to the list, so they get
I just wanted to.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. He should be. You know my good friend Randy Gill. This is my good friend Randy. Well, I
I'm going to get divorced from Wilson. No, I'm just going to get divorced from all kinds. What was I thinking?
I like the size.
Oh no, it's a medium. You know what I mean? So it's I'm actually doing controlled work too. Like, so if you go too small, you can't even do it. It's too lightweight. Yeah. The Z90, I think it is. We're all betting on this door, I guess, but it could be any door.
There he is, Jack Smith.
Why? Birthday.
Smith. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin today's hearing with opening statements. Chair is now recognized for an opening statement. It was always about politics. And to get President Trump, they were willing to do just about anything. January 7th, 2023, Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker of the House. 16 days later, Jack Smith issues a subpoena for his phone records. Phone records from 2 years prior for a 2-month time frame, Election Day 2020 to January 7th, 2021. Jack Smith and the Biden Justice Department get the phone records of the top Republican in government, the guy second in line to the president. They know who he called, who called him, when the call took place, and how long it lasted. You can pattern an individual's life. They know who the speaker talked to before big votes, who he talked to after big votes, when he calls his colleagues, when he calls his family. And to add insult to injury, they go to the judge with the subpoena for a gag order on the carrier. AT&T, don't tell your customer, the Speaker of the House, that you just gave his phone calls to Jack Smith and Joe Biden. And here's the kicker. They say to the court, we need this gag order because he's a flight risk. Someone might tamper with witnesses or with evidence. Are you kidding me? The Speaker of the House is going to run? A few hours, we're going to hear a lot of yelling and screaming, I assume, from the other side. But we should never forget what took place, what they did to the guy, we the people, elected president twice. It all started in 2016 when they spied on his campaign. The Clinton campaign hired the law firm Perkins Coie, who hired the public relations firm Fusion GPS, who hired a foreigner, Christopher Steele, to put together the fake dossier. Bunch of garbage in that document, but that was used by Jim Comey's FBI. And we all know Jim Comey. He was the guy who just last year was strolling along the beach when the good Lord had the waves wash up on shore, seashells in the formation of 8647. That guy took that dossier to the FISA court, lied to the court, and then spied on the other party's campaign. This, of course, led to the Mueller investigation, 2.5 years, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, $30 million to find nothing. No conspiracy, no coordination whatsoever. Then it was impeachment 1, anonymous whistleblower. We couldn't even know who was bringing the charge against the guy they were trying to take it, the guy we elected, who they're trying to kick out of office. We couldn't know. Secret hearings in the bunker, in the basement of the Capitol. Again, nothing. Then it was impeachment 2. No secret hearings here because they didn't have any hearings. It was the snap impeachment, and the Senate trial actually took place after President Trump wasn't in office. Then, of course, it was Alvin Bragg, who said before he got elected district attorney that there was no case here. Then he gets elected and changes his mind when the left starts pressuring him to go after President Trump. He hires Michael Colangelo, former Democrat National Committee consultant, and the number 3 guy at the Department of Justice. And then, of course, it's Fani and Nathan, Fani Willis and Nathan Wade in Fulton County, Georgia. We actually deposed Mr. Wade, one of the most interesting depositions I've sat through. We said to him, you billed taxpayers in Georgia thousands of dollars for meetings in D.C. with the January 6th committee and with the Biden administration. And we asked him some questions. Who'd you talk to, Mr. Wade? He couldn't remember. We said, where'd you meet? Did you meet the Capitol? Did you meet the White House? Where'd you meet? Couldn't remember that either. We said, were these meetings in person, on the phone, or did you have a Zoom meeting? Couldn't remember, couldn't remember, couldn't remember. We finally just asked him, did you really come to D.C. and meet people? He said, oh, yeah, I came. And I billed the taxpayers. I know I came. Just no idea who he talked to or what he did. And then there was the raid on President Trump's home, where they searched Barron's room and the First Lady's closet. In our deposition with Stephen D'Antuono, head of the FBI Washington field office, he told us none of the normal process, none of the normal protocol was followed in the investigation. He said, first of all, the case was run out of D.C. Normally you run it out of the Miami field office. No, we're going to run it out of DC. He said he recommended, and the people in the FBI at the time in the Washington field office recommended they give the president notice before they do the search, or at least when they got there, before they start the search, call the president's lawyers, ask them to come there and meet them and conduct the search together. Again, the answer from Maine Justice was no. Which brings us back to Mr. Smith. On November 18th, 2022, 3 days after President Trump announces he's running for president, Attorney General Garland names Jack Smith special counsel. One of the first things Mr. Smith does is put on his team the very people responsible for the raid on President Trump's home. The very people. And then Jack Smith also puts on his team the people responsible for getting the phone records of dozens of members of Congress. People like Thomas Wyndham, who, when we deposed him, took the fifth 71 times. We've actually referred him to the Justice Department for obstructing our investigation. Jack Smith then gets a gag order in his investigation on President Trump from Judge Chutkan without filing a single affidavit with the court from a witness or a potential witness that they felt threatened by statements from the president. Stop and think about it. Jack Smith restricts the speech of the former president while he's a candidate for president. Thank goodness Mr. Smith was slapped down on appeal and the order was changed. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, the Washington Post editorial page, Jack Smith would have blown a hole in the First Amendment. I just want to read 2 sentences from this. Mr. Smith seemed unconcerned about interfering in the democratic process by seeking to muzzle a candidate for high office. 3 appellate judges, all nominated by Democrat presidents, ruled that Mr. Smith's proposed gag order infringed on President Trump's First Amendment rights. And of course they did. And this wasn't the only time Mr. Smith lost in court. In the classified documents case in Miami, Judge Cannon held that Mr. Smith was not permitted to be special counsel. Jack Smith was never properly appointed. In fact, he couldn't be properly appointed because he was never confirmed by the Senate for any position in the executive branch as the law requires. Here's what Judge Cannon stated. Quote, the special counsel's position effectively usurps that important legislative authority, transferring it to a head of department and in the process threatening the structural liberty inherent in the separation of powers. And of course, on July 1st, 2024, the United States Supreme Court ruled that President Trump had immunity for actions taken in his official capacity as the president. 1 month later, after this decision by the Supreme Court, Jack Smith files a superseding indictment on August 27, 2024. But Mr. Smith doesn't stop there. He does something unprecedented. On October 2nd, he files a motion with the court before President Trump's defense counsel has even responded to the indictment. Everyone knows the normal process is the government indicts, the defense responds with some motions, and then the government responds to the defense. But Mr. Smith skips the second step. And the brief that he files is 165 pages, almost 4 times the court limit. Even liberal Judge Chutkan, who's given Jack Smith everything he's asked for in the course of this investigation, even she called it atypical and irregular. Now, why would Jack Smith do that? Why would he abandon proper procedure? Why would he ignore court rules? Why would he do that? Because he's running out of time. There's an election around the corner. It's coming in 33 days, and he's got to get President Trump. He's got to stop President Trump from running, tie him up in court. He's got to get to trial, or at a minimum, insert an 165-page political document into the presidential campaign. It was always about politics. The good news is the American people saw through it. They saw through it. For so long, the left has controlled so much in this country. The left controlled big media, the left controlled big tech, the left controlled academia, Hollywood, certainly the Democrat Party, and I think all too much the federal bureaucracy. But the left doesn't control we the people. And in spite of the left, and the weaponization efforts of Jim Comey, Alvin Bragg, Fonnie Willis, and Jack Smith, we the people saw through it all, and we elected President Trump twice. Before turning to the ranking member for his opening statement, I would just ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the Washington Post editorial, "Jack Smith would have blown a hole in the First Amendment." With that, I yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
An American president has had. The good chairman started by saying it's all about the politics. Well, maybe for them, but for us, it's all about the rule of law and who's going to stand by the rule of law and who's going to oppose it. Now, Mr. Smith, you're one of America's great prosecutors. For nearly 3 decades, you worked for justice under both Republicans and Democrats. The Manhattan DA office, where you prosecuted sex crimes and domestic violence cases. The Eastern District of New York, where you prosecuted murderers, rapists, gangbangers, and other violent criminals. Leading the public integrity section at the Department of Justice, you brought prosecutions against corrupt public officials across the political spectrum. When you went to The Hague as chief prosecutor in the Kosovo trial, you prosecuted war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated against thousands of innocent victims. While others may have devoted their lives to corrupt self-enrichment, you have devoted your life to the rule of law and to public service. You've never been prosecuted for anything. You've never been convicted of anything. As far as I can tell, you've never even been the subject of a disciplinary proceeding over the course of your multi-decade career. But Donald Trump says you're a criminal and you belong in prison. He says you belong in prison, not because you did anything wrong, mind you, but because you did everything right. You pursued the facts, you followed the law, you stuck with extreme caution to every rule of professional responsibility. You had the audacity to do your job. Everybody here knows what you did wrong in Donald Trump's eyes and why he says you belong in prison. You found, and I quote from your sworn testimony before the committee, you found proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election and to prevent the lawful transfer of power. When asked whether you believe the evidence was enough to obtain a criminal conviction against Donald Trump at trial, you had a one-word answer: yes. When asked if Donald Trump was responsible for the violence that took place at the Capitol on January 6th, you said, our view of the evidence was that he caused it and that he exploited it and that it was foreseeable to him. You found that Trump knew he had lost the election. How? Well, his own Attorney General, William Barr, repeatedly told him so and described all of Trump's theories as BS. Trump's top campaign advisors told him he lost the election. Vice President Pence told him he lost the election. More than 60 federal, state, and court decisions, including 8 rendered by judges he appointed to the bench, rejected every outlandish election fraud and corruption claim that he made. Trump himself even privately acknowledged it, gesturing to Joe Biden on TV and saying, quote, "Can you believe I lost to that effing guy?" He knew he lost, but he threw everything into his big lie, which some people, even in this room to this day, will stand by and swear by. Well, when the big lie wasn't enough to convince officials like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, to commit election fraud and just fine Trump 11,780 votes, when it wasn't enough to convince Trump's DOJ to, quote, just call the election corrupt and leave the rest to me and the House Republicans, when it wasn't enough to force Vice President Mike Pence to announce and then exercise lawless powers to reject electoral college votes and use counterfeit slates to anoint Trump the winner, that's when Trump incited mass violence on January 6th. While more than 140 officers were being brutally assaulted by Trump's mob, while rioters beat them with flagpoles and sprayed them with chemical agents and crushed them in doorways, And while they chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," and chased the vice president out of the Capitol, Trump and his team worked the phones, calling not the National Guard, which was under the direct unilateral control of Donald Trump, but calling members of Congress, urging them to delay certification and to nullify the election results. Special Counsel Smith, you pursued the facts. You followed every applicable law, ethics rule, and DOJ regulation. Your decisions were reviewed by the Public Integrity Section. You acted based solely on the facts, the opposite of Donald Trump, who now has purported to take over the Department of Justice. He's in charge of the whole thing under his unitary executive theory, and he acts openly, purely based on political vendetta and motives of personal revenge, and he doesn't deny it. Our colleagues have complained about the special counsel's review of toll records, which are phone records like a phone bill, showing only the timing and duration of calls and containing no content, no substance whatsoever from the calls. But those records were lawfully subpoenaed because Donald Trump made those members of Congress relevant to the investigation. It was Trump who chose to call them to advance his criminal scheme. As you testified, Mr. Smith, if Donald Trump had chosen to call a number of Democratic senators, we would have gotten toll records for them too. I trust our colleagues get the point because America certainly gets the point. There is much Mr. Smith still can't talk about, though we know he badly wants to. His investigation developed what he calls powerful evidence that Trump stole documents containing our country's most sensitive secrets, hoarded them in the ballrooms and the bathrooms of his well-trafficked Mar-a-Lago social club. He showed them off to visitors, and then he obstructed a federal investigation by instructing his attorney to pluck out anything really bad before turning materials over to the FBI and having his staff delete incriminating security tape footage. But today, we're not going to hear a lot about that because you are gagged by an absurd judicial order rendered faithfully by Trump's most servile and sycophantic appointee to the federal bench, Judge Eileen Cannon. This order not only blocks release of Volume 2 of your report, which is unprecedented, about the classified document scam, it also gags you from discussing the report or its contents with us, with America. And so we don't know what's in it, but it must be pretty devastating because Donald Trump is desperate to keep Mr. Smith or any other DOJ official for all time from ever releasing it to Congress and to the American people. Now, Mr. Smith, if any of our colleagues foolishly choose to attack you and vilify you today, and I know that's not going to happen from some serious prosecutors over there like Mr. Knott and Mr. Schmidt, who understand what federal prosecutors do and what the rule of law means. But if anybody decides to attack you personally, they will only be revealing their own ignorance of what prosecutors do and their own indifference to what the rule of law requires in America. They will only be stroking the wounded ego of a lawless, twice impeached, convicted felon president who not only unleashed a mob against Congress and his own vice president, but is now pardoned and released into our communities hundreds of extremists, insurrectionists, and cop-beating felons who have proceeded to commit dozens more crimes against the American people since they were pardoned. Mr. Smith, I understand you are a long-distance marathon runner. I read that you're a triathlete who's done more than 100 triathlons and 9 Ironman competitions. You are in the fight for justice and the rule of law for the long distance, for the long haul, and I thank you for that. And we should all try to follow your example. America looks forward to your testimony today. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back without objection. All of their opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witness. Mr. Jack Smith was appointed as special counsel on November 18th, 2022. He served until January 7th, 2025. We welcome our witness today. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God?
I do.
Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You can be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony Mr. Smith, you may begin.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss my work as special counsel. I love my country and believe deeply in the core principles upon which it was founded. For nearly 3 decades, I've served as a career prosecutor in both Republican and Democratic administrations. I've handled cases ranging from domestic assault and gang violence to public corruption and election crimes across the United States, and I've prosecuted war crimes overseas. I am not a politician, and I have no partisan loyalties. My career has been dedicated to serving our country by upholding the rule of law. Throughout my public service, my approach has always been the same: follow the facts and the law without fear or favor. Experienced prosecutors know that specific case outcomes are beyond our control. Our responsibility is to do the right thing, the right way, for the right reasons. These principles have guided me through my career, including as special counsel. I'm proud of the work my team did, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today to correct false and misleading narratives about our work. During my tenure as special counsel, we followed Justice Department policies, we observed legal requirements, and took actions based on the facts and the law. I made my decisions without regard to President Trump's political association, activities, beliefs, or candidacy in the 2024 election. President Trump was charged because the evidence established that he willfully broke the law, the very laws he took an oath to uphold. Grand juries in 2 separate districts reached this conclusion based on his actions, as alleged in the indictments they returned. Rather than accept his defeat in the 2020 election, President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results and prevent the lawful transfer of power. After leaving office in January of 21, President Trump illegally kept classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago social club and repeatedly tried to obstruct justice to conceal his continued retention of those documents. Highly sensitive national security information was held in a ballroom and a bathroom. As I testify before the committee today, I want to be clear. I stand by my decisions as special counsel, including the decision to bring charges against President Trump. Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity. If asked whether to prosecute a former president based on the same facts today, I would do so regardless of whether that president was a Democrat or a Republican. No one should be above the law in this country, and the law required that he be held to account, so that is what I did. To have done otherwise on the facts of these cases would have been to shirk my duties as a prosecutor and as a public servant, of which I had no intention of doing. I remain grateful for the counsel, judgment, and advice of my team. President Trump has sought to seek revenge against career prosecutors, FBI agents, and support staff simply for having worked on these cases. To vilify and seek retribution against these people is wrong. Those dedicated public servants are the best of us, and it has been a privilege to serve with them. After nearly 30 years of public service, including in international settings, I have seen how the rule of law can erode. My fear is that we have seen the rule of law function in our country for so long that many of us have come to take it for granted. The rule of law is not self-executing. It depends on our collective commitment to apply it. It requires dedicated service on behalf of others, especially when that service is difficult and comes with costs. Our willingness to pay those costs is what tests and defines our commitment to the rule of law and to this wonderful country. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we will now proceed under the 5-minute rule. We have votes coming in any minute now, but I think we'll have time for 3 or 4 members to get their 5-minute questions in before the committee will take a recess to go vote. They are not going to close the vote until we get there. I know that much. So we will start with the gentleman from California. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Reason for appointing a special counsel. What did you take that to mean?
What I understood that to mean is I was to conduct an independent investigation and come to my own conclusions about whether the facts and the law supported a prosecution.
But clearly he was alluding to the fact that we had an investigation into a leading candidate for president. That was part of the extraordinary circumstances. Would you agree?
I will rely on his public statements about that. I understood my role as special counsel was governed by the regulations, which required me to make an independent decision on my own.
So certainly you would agree it was important to approach the investigation with humility and restraint. Is that fair?
Yes, and that's what I sought to do. I sought to
And you thought you possessed those qualities. In fact, you testified at your deposition, quote, "I thought I was the right person for the job." Of course, some disagreed. Constitutional law professor Jonathan Turley, for example, has said, quote, "Jack Smith has a reputation for stretching criminal statutes beyond the breaking point." I assume you disagree with that statement by Professor Turley.
I do disagree with that statement. I think my career speaks for itself. I have been
But that statement was also, and I'm sorry to have to interrupt, I just have a short amount of time. That statement was also echoed by the United States Supreme Court in a unanimous opinion in McDonald versus the United States, where the court overturned convictions that you had pursued against a former governor, criticizing your boundless interpretation of the federal criminal statute. At issue, that opinion was joined by Justices Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. So do you also disagree with that statement by those justices?
I have conducted my career in a nonpartisan fashion. That particular case, the legal position that the department took, that wasn't my personal position. That was the position of the department.
I see. So, Mr. Smith, I've had the opportunity during my time on this committee to review the work of 2 special counsels, John Durham, appointed during the Trump administration, and Robert Erb during the Biden administration. And in both cases, they seem to exhibit that humility and restraint that we talked about. But in reviewing in detail the way you conducted this investigation, I see a very different mode of operation, one that sought maximum litigation advantage at every turn, one that repeatedly circumvented constitutional limitations to the point that you had to be reined in again and again throughout the process. For example, shortly after you became special counsel, you issued a subpoena for the phone records of the Speaker of the House of Representatives over a 2-month period, along with for other senators and representatives, even though the public integrity section at DOJ cited litigation risk to doing this. What was that litigation risk?
With respect to the toll record subpoenas that we issued, they were approved by the public integrity section. The public integrity section, in approving those subpoenas, noted the fact that the subpoenas were for records for people who were not targets of our investigation.
But they said there was a litigation risk and you moved forward with it anyway. And not only that, but you also sought orders from judges, making it so those who were having their records seized would not know about it. And you even didn't tell those judges that it was members of Congress whose records you were going after, in apparent contravention of a federal statute saying that a telephone provider for a Senate office shall not be barred from providing notice that the records had been requested. Now, if you sought to do that today, would you be able to get away with that, with asking the judges for a non-disclosure order without telling them these are members of Congress?
When we secured these toll record subpoenas, it was done consistent with department policy. You're correct in that that policy has since changed.
They changed the policy based upon the actions that you took. Similarly, you issued a gag order against President Trump that the DC Circuit Court of Appeals vacated as overbroad. Is that correct?
Well, the DC Court of Appeals, in passing on that order, found that it was justified. They narrowed the order, but they confirmed that the phenomenon—
They narrowed the order because it was overbroad. In addition to that, you sought an early trial date that the district court rejected. And when you presented your prosecution memo to Attorney General.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5
Well,
minutes.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the good gentleman from California certainly knows, because he was a student of mine, that lawyers go to court and sometimes they win motions and sometimes they lose motions, and there's no crime in any of that. And I'm just sorry that you had to be lectured about humility and restraint by a politician, because we might not be best poised to lecture you on those particular virtues. But let's go to the toll record, since that's been raised, Mr. Smith. First of all, by our colleagues, as they've eagerly anticipated your arrival here, they've been saying that there's some kind of First Amendment defense that Donald Trump would have had to the crimes you indicted him for. Is there a valid First Amendment defense to defrauding the public? Is there a valid First Amendment defense to disrupting a federal proceeding? Is there a valid First Amendment defense to violating the voting rights of the people and cheating the public out of a fair election?
The First Amendment is something that we took seriously in our investigation, but the First Amendment does not protect speech that facilitates a crime. Speech that is used to facilitate a crime, a fraud crime in particular, is not protected under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court precedent on that is clear. This is an issue that we litigated before the district court, and the district court ruled, as I just stated, that it is not in fact protected.
And the case law is perfectly clear on this, right? All frauds are perpetrated by speech, right?
Yes.
All conspiracies are perpetrated by speech. So just because your criminal conduct is brigaded with speech doesn't somehow mean you've got a First Amendment defense against trying to overthrow the government. I mean, the people who attacked the police officers on January 6th were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." I suppose that was political speech, or they were saying, "Stop the steal." Does that mean they've got a First Amendment defense to violent assault against the officers?
It does not.
William Barr, by the way, was somebody who was perfectly clear about that. Donald Trump's own attorney general said, there's no freedom of speech that you have to engage in a conspiracy, to overthrow an election, to commit crime. He was perfectly clear about that. Back in those days, in fact, lots of people on that side of the aisle, including my good friend, the chairman, denounced the violence that took place on January 6th. The cat's got their tongue these days. My friend Chairman Jordan said, what happened last week was terrible, is tragic. It's as wrong can be, he said. Republicans, we know all political violence is wrong. I asked my friend Chairman Jordan at a rules hearing, are you also not interested in what happened to us on January 6th? He said, of course, everyone's interested in holding people accountable who did wrong. The FBI is doing that. The Justice Department is doing that appropriately. You and Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Smith, is Cassidy Hutchinson a liar? She was their star witness, January 6th committee, their star witness in one of those staged and choreographed hearings they paid the former president of ABC News to put together. She was, in fact, the only witness at this special prime time hearing, Tuesday, June 28th, 2022, 8 o'clock in the evening, and she told some stories. I mean, these were some stories. She talked about President lunged across the back seat, grabbed the steering wheel, tried to drive the car to the Capitol. And I just want to know, you think she was lying?
Chairman Jordan, my assessment of that particular issue is that with respect to the testimony about the president lunging towards the driver, my recollection of her testimony about that is that it was secondhand. She said she'd heard that from somebody.
You familiar with the name Tony Ornato?
I'm sorry.
You familiar with the name Tony Ornato?
Yes.
White House Deputy Chief of Operations, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, right? You remember what he said about it?
As I sit here right now, I do not.
Yeah, he said it didn't happen. How about Bobby Engel? You familiar with that name?
Yes, I am.
Secret Service agent who was actually in the car that day. You know what he said? He said it didn't happen. And they both said the first time they ever heard this story was when Ms. Hutchinson testified in the primetime hearing as their star witness of the January 6th committee. By the way, did you ever confirm her testimony about this particular incident?
We conducted, as I said before, our own independent investigation of all aspects of the case that we thought was relevant. We, attorneys from my office.
Did you ever confirm it? That's a simple question.
Well, we interviewed, or I should say, attorneys in my office before.
Did you ever confirm the president leaping across the seat, grabbing the steering wheel, this whole concoction she brought up in the January 6th hearing? Did you ever confirm that?
Right. We interviewed another firsthand witness who was in the car, who did not confirm that had happened, but also
in your deposition to the committee last month, Mr. Smith, you said this: my recollection with Ms. Hutchinson was a number of the things that she gave evidence on were secondhand hearsay. You remember making that statement to us last month in the deposition?
I did, and I was referring particularly to what we're talking about now.
Yeah, and you also said Ms. Hutchinson regarding this particular claim was a second or even third-hand witness. We asked you, if you were a defense attorney, how would you handle cross-examining her if she was on the witness stand? And you said, if I were a defense attorney and Ms. Hutchinson were a witness, the first thing I would do was seek to preclude her testimony because it was hearsay. You remember saying all that?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
That's correct, right? Were you going to put her on the witness stand if you ever got to trial?
We had not made final determinations as to who we were going to call as a witness. We had a large.
You were still considering her?
We had a large choice of witnesses in this case.
Are you familiar with what Washington Post reporters Carol Leonnig and Aaron Davis said in their book? They did this book, 300-some pages book on chronicling the whole investigation of the Justice Department. And here's what they said on page 310. They said, Jack Smith had wondered whether some of Hutchinson's claims might be relied upon at trial. Still, at one point, Smith told the elections team he wasn't ready to give up on Hutchinson's account. Ultimately, however, Trump administration officials uniformly, fiercely disputed her accounts under oath. Prosecutors on your team told Smith they wouldn't want to use Hutchinson as a witness in court, and Smith agreed. Are Carol Leonnig and Aaron Davis, who wrote this, are they lying?
My recollection is that I certainly had not made any final determinations about who we were going to call.
And that's the point. That is the point. The fact that they used her in a primetime hearing and you won't rule out using her, didn't rule out using her, putting her on the witness stand when everybody knows she wasn't telling the truth, that says it all. That's the degree the left and Democrats were willing to go to get President Trump, putting on the witness stand someone everybody knows is making it up. Everybody knows that. And you were willing to do it. By the way, you know how many times Cassidy Hutchinson was mentioned in their report, the January 6th report? Any idea, Mr. Smith?
I do not.
185 times. Someone that the whole country knows wasn't telling the truth, and you were still considering putting her on the witness stand because you had to get President Trump. And everybody can see that. We better take a recess for votes. We will resume as soon as votes are over. Back here 10 minutes after. Mr. Smith, you guys can go back to the room that you were in.
All right, we're going to keep this on. We're going to keep this on. So Jack Smith testifying, getting the grilling. As you know, it's partisan. You have Jim Jordan and Jamie Raskin. Raskin's defending him. Jim Jordan, going at him. That's how it's going to be. It's going to be along partisan lines here with that. I'm also monitoring a situation that is brewing in Minneapolis. There has been arrests made in Minneapolis in reference to the church storming incident. 2 people have been arrested. One, a St. Paul school board member by the name of Chantil Allen. A school board member has now been arrested, and also the leader of Black Lives Matter, activist lawyer Nekima Levy Armstrong has been arrested. 2 people arrested, and they say more to come. So that's interesting. Let me try to look at the feeds here and see, if they show like Jack Smith leaving out or whatnot, to at least keep it interesting. Interesting. Yeah. So let me go to this. Well, nope. I'm gonna go to a feed here with Jack Smith. Maybe he walks out, maybe he goes to the hallway, maybe he answers questions, and that's what it is. I'll just go to the Fox one to kind of just show you the side view of what's going on. We were definitely going to be covering the stuff later on today in Minneapolis with the Vice President of the United States there, and arrests have been made. I expect more arrests to come soon. This is a side angle, so I'll just keep this here, and we can just talk. We'll just keep it on. I don't know if you guys are bored with this or what, but apparently some members that were there are going to go over to a vote real quick on another matter, and then they'll come back and continue the questioning of Jack Smith, who's under oath, by the way. You know, he's a career prosecutor. You know, he's going to use his words wisely when he's answering questions so he doesn't get in contempt of Congress or any type of perjury charge or anything like that, for sure. He's going to be very careful here. But do you think Jack Smith did the right thing? He's basically saying on the record that Donald Trump violated the law. Violated the law. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy here. See what's going on. Yeah, we'll keep this here. I'm also looking what's going on in let's listen to NBC. NBC got a reporter there. We'll listen in on NBC in the meantime. Get some perspective, boots on the ground perspective there. We'll listen in. I actually don't have anybody speaking anymore.
The heavy focus on Cassidy Hutchinson so early on in this questioning, I think, is probably an opening salvo for what will be a number of opportunities for Republicans to try and intertwine these two things when they really are separate issues, Hallie.
That's an important point, Ryan. The other thing I want you to touch on there in the room, you've got in the front row, and it was pointed out by Congressman Jamie Raskin, some of the officers, 4 of them, I believe, who were involved, who were attacked on that day, January 6th. You see them here. They have been public about their concerns around the way that President Trump has handled the January 6th pardons of the rioters and others.
Yeah, these are probably the 4 most outspoken former Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police Department officers who were there on the front lines during the January 6th Select Committee, who've been insistent specifically that they believe Donald Trump should have paid the price for the conduct that took place here on Capitol Hill, that it was not enough for the rioters themselves to be convicted, but that there needed to be some accountability for people higher up the chain. So it's not a surprise to see them in the front row. I think this group in particular feels as though the events of January 6th have been whitewashed by Republicans and by the president specifically, that the president's reelection has forced the narrative around January 6th to change. And they were the group that were on the front lines that suffered lingering and long-term health effects as a result of the beating that they took here on January 6th. So the fact that they are in this gallery, that they are watching and participating in this hearing is, again, a reminder of the fact that they do not want this story to go away, and that Jack Smith is a good example of how there have been efforts to try and make this story go away.
Ryan, thank you. Let me go to Ryan Riley now, our justice reporter. And Ryan, it's notable, too, that this is really one of the more high-profile moments that we've seen for Jack Smith in a setting like this. Somebody who, by your reporting, I know at the time, was immensely focused on these investigations, on the prosecutions, and less so with the, what you'll call maybe the PR piece of it.
Yeah, and essentially what you had first was a dress rehearsal for this, right? Because they had that deposition that happened behind closed doors, and then they subsequently released clips on it. And I would note that, the date that those clips were released was New Year's Eve, late in the afternoon. And so there was the question of whether Republicans thought that they got much out of Jack Smith in that first round. What they did focus on was questions about the First Amendment. And they seemed to think that they tripped him up on the First Amendment at one point. But Representative Raskin, during this public hearing, I think sort of got out ahead of those expected attacks and laid out, that there are First Amendment components of many criminal cases, right? If the First Amendment was a total protection against criminal prosecutions, you wouldn't have many criminal prosecutions because it has such a essential element, especially as Jack Smith emphasized in those fraud cases. And a lot of this was already previously been litigated. You know, Jack Smith's team had gone for a restriction on what Donald Trump could say about the investigation that was a little bit broader than the appeals courts ultimately decided on, and that the scope of that was narrowed. But you know, he had the free speech opportunity to attack this investigation as much as he wanted, just as he had the free speech ability to proclaim falsehoods about the 2020 election. And I think that that's something that Jack Smith really hit on. The difference here is that the government function, right? So when you're targeting a government function, meaning the peaceful transfer of power, and you're using misstatements and falsehoods that Jack Smith's team alleged that Trump knew were false. And I think that was a key element of their case, is that they believe that Donald Trump knew that these were lies, that this was not untruths that he was spreading about the 2020 election. That does still factor into a criminal prosecution. And so the First Amendment is not a protection. Of course, the sort of ironic split screen to this is that you do have these other cases which do involve, I think, real First Amendment considerations, according to a lot of legal scholars I talked to, being launched by the Justice Department against Democrats in Minnesota. You have those investigations into both the mayor and the governor there over their speech about ICE. And so the distinction between those cases, I think, is going to be a real tricky line for Republicans to have to navigate here going forward. And I think Raskin sort of laid out what the actual legal issues are at play here.
Well, let me bring in one of those maybe aforementioned legal scholars. Ryan, thank you. Stand by. And that's our legal analyst, Danny Savalos here, because this is important here, this distinction that Ryan is laying out, that Congressman Raskin has laid out, to the argument that you are hearing against some of what Jack Smith has done from some of the Republicans on the panel. And I want to be clear here, you are looking at video on screen of what has just played out in the last 50 minutes. Reminder here that the House members are on a brief break to go vote. They're going to come back in a little bit. But Danny, on this issue of the First Amendment rights that the president may have to say things that about the election, that he doesn't like it, doesn't believe the results, et cetera, different from this issue of, as Smith has put it, defrauding the government, essentially. Help us understand that and the way that has played into what Smith has done.
Sure. Virtually none of our constitutional rights are absolute. The First Amendment is not an absolute right. It is not an absolute protection. As Ryan pointed out, there are so many different exceptions. And of course, committing a crime like fraud is an exception to the protections of the First Amendment. The only thing here is that Professor Raskin is putting the cart before the legal horse somewhat by concluding that, hey, when you have a case of fraud, is that protected by the First Amendment? And of course, you could almost sense it in Smith's response. Obviously, he probably wanted to say, obviously, it is not protected by the First Amendment. But that assumes that fraud has already been proven. And of course, any defendant charged with fraud is going to argue, well, this wasn't fraud. Fraud is a gigantic tent. It includes everything from credit card fraud to what they're alleging, for example, Donald Trump did, which is a markedly different kind of alleged fraud. So while Congressman Raskin is correct, in my view, it assumes that fraud was already proven.
Danny, I'll ask you to stand by, too, while I bring in our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez, who is with us as well. And as you heard, Republicans, and as the president has in the past, painted Jack Smith as a kind of partisan figure, laboring on these prosecutions for political reasons. That is the accusation that the president has lobbed at Jack Smith repeatedly, Gabe. You heard Smith defend himself on that front, saying, hey, he's not political, he's not partisan, that he does the job and it's not involved. He doesn't consider the political cast, if you will. And he also talked about his team, defending his team against what he clearly sees as revenge or retaliation from the Trump administration.
Yeah, certainly. And look, Hallie, the White House, we don't have any reaction from White House officials to this hearing as we speak. But given what they previously said, they would look at this and, following Jim Jordan's line of questioning, that's something that they have argued, that this was a theater, that this was a witch hunt. President Trump, even just a few days ago, speaking to reporters, calling Jack Smith sick, in addition to previously.
All right, so we're listening in while they take a recess here to make some votes or do some votes, and I don't know what they're voting on, but we'll take it back here. That was some NBC reporting of what's going on. We're waiting to see. I'm also monitoring the situation in Minneapolis. Now, we're going to go to Minneapolis on another stream here, probably in the next hour or so, because a lot is going on there. So I'm going to definitely go to Minneapolis, but we're just kind of, listening in, kind of hearing it out, seeing what's said, seeing if there's any craziness between people that are questioning Jack Smith or any response by Jack Smith. You know how it gets. There's always sound bites and clips that, something like, whoa, but it seems like Jack Smith is, just when he took his oath standing up there, it seems like he's all professionalism with him. So I think he's taking the situation very, very seriously. Yeah, it's crazy in Minneapolis this morning. They have arrested multiple people, and it looks like multiple people might be still getting arrested here because they say more to come. So covering and monitoring that situation thus far. And Border Patrol Greg Bavino actually spoke a little bit ago. Let me see how long that he spoke for, because JD Vance is going on at Border Patrol spoke for about 30 minutes or so. So maybe we'll cover that and listen into JD Vance and them in a bit. So we're just going to hang out here for a bit. They're probably going to be coming in shortly, and we'll go from there. Crazy stuff going on around the country right now. Perp walk here. In the meantime, I'll show you a photo here. I'll just get something up here and show you the arrest of the leader of the church, protester. I guess you would call her the protester. Here, I'll put this up here. Get her up here. Let me see here. This is pretty wild. He just posted this. Here she is. Leader of the BLM movement here. This is coming from Kristi Noem. And she's saying basically is this person here has been arrested. Homeland Security investigators and FBI agents arrested Nekima Levy Armstrong, who played a key role in orchestrating the church riots in St. Paul, Minnesota. She is being charged with a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. 241. Now, I looked at 18 U.S.C. 241, up to 10 years in prison, though you can get life in prison if it results in death and other things. So I don't think she's facing life, but she's facing up to 10 years in prison. Religious freedom is the bedrock of the United States. There are no First Amendment right to obstruct someone from practicing their religion. So this is one. And then also another one, a school board member also got arrested too. So there's two. So arrests have been made. And I think we're going to hear more about that. And it's interesting, the rest come this morning as the Vice President of the United States, arrives there for a roundtable meeting discussion to try to quell the craziness that's going on. Wow. So, yeah, we'll touch on that in a bit. Second arrest has been made. Chantel Louisa Allen, a St. Paul school board member. School board member has been arrested. It's crazy stuff. School board member. Here, I'll put that up here too, just to show you the other person that has been arrested. While we wait for Jack Smith to come back, this is the other one. Here she is. This is a St. Paul, Minnesota school board member. Her name is Chantel Allen, arrested by the FBI this morning for storming a Minneapolis church. So I'm looking at Don Lemon. Don Lemon, everyone's like, where's Don Lemon? Don Lemon is probably next because Don Lemon is personal friends with the other one. And he was there, and she gave that guy a heads up about what they were doing. He says it's journalism. It will be an interesting argument, though. He would, whether you like Don Lemon or not, I think he will have some arguments, legal arguments about the First Amendment, about being a journalist and stuff like that through the whole process. So Don Lemon's case is if he got charged, would be much, much different than these people, I believe, unless those people specifically say Don Lemon is in on it. When you get cases like with multiple co-defendants or multiple people for the same act, people start flipping on people. And Don can say it's journalism. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's I think it's a gray area, to be honest. You know, he was there. I understand he's going in there to report what's going on. But, you know, I'll just use another example where journalists claimed journalism and it didn't work. And that was January 6th, the Capitol. There was multiple people that were like citizen journalists that, you know, just followed the group of people inside the Capitol to document and film what's going on. They didn't take a position like, hey, they support Trump or, you know, they're anti whatever. They just went in there objective with their cameras, and they've been arrested and actually, you know, convicted and or plead for, you know, trespassing. So, you know, storming the Capitol, whatever you want to call it, because there was a bunch of charges, but, you know, people under the journalism. So that's just an example. These people Don Lemon might just say, well, I was only doing journalism going in. Well, you know, I don't know. I don't know if it will work. Capitol's different too. So, you know, I don't know if it will work. I mean, he was on TV talking about, you know, a couple days ago, talking about churches are public places until you're told to leave. You're not trespassing, but they're not charged with trespassing. They're charged with other type of charges here. 18 USC 241, which is, by the way, 18 USC 241. It's like a violation of like civil rights. Let me just give you the statute here. 18 USC 241. 18 USC Title 18. You won't mess with Title 18. Conspiracy against rights. Makes it a federal crime for two or more people to conspire, injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate someone in the free exercise of their constitutional federal rights, or because they have exercised those rights. Penalties range from fines and up to 10 years in prison, to life in prison, or even the death penalty if the conspiracy results in death, kidnapping, or aggravated SA. Now, obviously, it's not death, kidnapping, and aggravated SA. Doesn't apply to them, but they could face up to 10 years in prison or a fine. And then notice it says two or more people. Conspiracy, two or more people. So, you know, Don Lemon, maybe they'll arrest him. I mean, they claim that more to come. Now, Don Lemon's up on his YouTube channel. He's, you know, covering this right now. I was just peeping him, but I can tell you, I put out a tweet that was crazy. I can tell you now, yeah, I do this sometimes too. When things are going on, I look at my phone and look down. But when these two individuals got arrested and announced that they got arrested on social media by Pam Bondi, and you know, the Justice Department, they put tweets out saying, announcing their arrest. Don Lemon's on his live, and he's totally looking down on his phone, like around the same time, because he knows he's probably getting all wind. Oh my God, what's going on? Now, is he confident to say, I'm a journalist, I'm not going to get arrested? You know, regardless, that is getting under his skin. It's getting under Don Lemon's skin for sure. He's panicking. He's worrying. Am I going to be next? Are they going to come, you know, arrest me? What are these people going to say? Are they going to tell on me? Are they going to lie about me? You know, Don Lemon is definitely panicking this morning. He can put on a brave face all he wants. He's panicking. For sure. He's worrying. He's worrying because, you know, the talk was that he could get arrested too. So we shall see. Let me turn up the volume here, and we're waiting for this to get back in session here.
Likewise, yes. And so are you based out of Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know when this comes back. I don't know when this is going to come back here. When they say they're going away to make the vote, but very soon I think we're going to start covering what's going on in Minneapolis. I just wanted to stop by here. This could be all afternoon, but I think this is going to bleed into when JD Vance and Minneapolis, because I believe there's protesters and things like that outside the venue that he is going to speak at. So he's on his way. I think he stopped in Ohio. And then we'll also talk about the arrest and everything like that. And then Bavino and all them gave a press conference about an hour ago, about 30-minute press conference. And they talked about the craziness that happened with them, with all the gas stations and them being attacked yesterday while they were all over the place. So I think what we'll do is, for now, I think I'm gonna sign off on this. If you guys want to continue to watch what's going on with this, I would strongly recommend, some of the other channels there that are covering it live. But I think I'm going to pivot over to Minneapolis because there is some things popping off here in the next hour, so I can prepare and get ready and everything like that. So I think I'm going to come back with the second stream on at 11:30ish. We'll cover what Bavino said and also the arrest of these churchgoers. I'll try to get some clips up and put everything together. And we'll come back and we'll cover what's happening in Minneapolis for the afternoon. I think that's the best thing to do here. Because this is going to go for a while. And I actually want to see what's going on in Minneapolis. And we can clip this and talk about this later. I think that's what we're going to do. That's what I'm going to do. I'm signing off. All right, so I'm going to sign off. I'll be back in about 20, 30 minutes. We'll go do a new stream on Minneapolis, so stay tuned for that. I'll set up the stream here. All right, we cover what's going on 24/7, 365. Let me know what you think. We got our eyes on the nation today, so dropping by, listening to a little bit of Jack Smith, any fireworks or anything like that. While we're on our other live, we'll come back on this. We'll talk soon. Y'all be safe out there. JLR investigates.